This is one of the cheapest flattening sleds on the market right now. This flattening sled is designed by Rutlands. A quick disclaimer, I'm not sponsored by them. I've purchased this with my own money. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to assemble it. And then I'll also run it a few times and see if it's actually worth the money. Let's get it all assembled. So first things first, we've got to assemble it all. My initial impressions from opening the box, it seems all well padded. Each component seems to have its own little area, so it's all padded up nicely. I don't think there's any damage to any parts from what I can see. This is the router plate itself. It's made of a 10mm thick acrylic sheet. You've got pre-drilled holes here. Those are for the rails. And first things first, I just want to check to see if this is flat. Yep. Yeah, it's pretty flat. It is acrylic, so there might be a tendency to actually bend it if you put a lot of pressure on. Now, Rutlands say on their website that this can take the heaviest of routers on the market. Now, I've got a pretty big router to put into this thing, so we'll get to really stress test to see if we can bend this acrylic. The hole for the base plate here is 63mm wide, so that is the biggest bit that you'll be able to fit through it. But I suppose there's nothing stopping you from putting the bits through the hole underneath and then attach them to the router that way. There is a film for this acrylic on both sides, so I'm just going to take that off now. Now that's done, we just need to drill the holes for the router. The router I'm going to be using is this Triton TRA001. Now this thing is an absolute beast, weighing in at 6.4 kilograms. This is the router that your girlfriend tells you not to worry about. If the sled can hold this sort of weight without distorting, then I'm happy that it's strong enough for anything else. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the base plate from my router so I can mark the holes where the bolts need to go onto my router plate. It's important to note before you start marking the holes that the maximum diameter of this base plate to fit onto this plate is 185mm. If you go any bigger than that, then there's a risk you're going to start obstructing the drill holes and where the rails need to be. You also need to pay attention to where you're drilling your holes. Now for me, and I'm sure for you guys at home, if I put it around here, these are the 4 holes I need to drill through. However, although this looks square, and it's square to the router plate itself, this base plate doesn't sit square on the router itself. Let me show you. So I've set the camera up perfectly in line horizontally with these router handles here. But you need to pay attention to where the holes you're actually going to drill. So for me, they're not actually in line with the handles. They're slightly askew to the right. So I need to make up that difference in that skew when I go to drill it into the router plate itself. Because if I drill it in as it is right now, then I'm going to find that I'm going to be holding the router slightly like this. And for me, I don't want that. Fortunately, this router comes with a groove here. And that way I know that if I'm slightly off like this, that groove needs to mark up with this groove. If you don't have a groove like that and your holes aren't symmetrical, then you might find it easier just to line up the holes of your base plate and then just draw a line down each part. So you know if you're slightly off like that, that you're actually off, and you want to line the lines up like so. So I put some masking tape down so I can mark the masking tape and I can actually see where I'm making my marks. I'm going to put my base plate back onto the router. I'm not putting the bolts back in. And I'm just going to lower it to the router plate. Once you've got everything lined up, you just want to make sure that the distance on all sides are roughly symmetrical with one another. So at the moment, this side is slightly far over, so I need to bring that a bit closer to me. So we're just on the lip here. On the other side, just on the lip on this side. You've got a distance of 6 centimeters from here and a distance of 6 centimeters from there. So at the moment, it's all in the right place. Just as an extra precaution, I am just going to mark around the edges on the tape here in case I lose it. So now if I raise the router up, and now you can see the base plate is exactly where I want to drill the holes. And then you can just mark where you need to drill your holes. So the holes are marked up and ready to go. Fortunately for me, the holes match up the same way as they do at this angle and to the other direction. Now, that might not mean much for some, however, you might want to consider that these rails are 1 meter long. Now, for me, I'm going to set the router up like this, so it's going along the track like so. And the reason why I'm doing it that way is that because it's such a big router, although it should be a smooth motion getting it back and forth, if I have it this way, it means I can push and pull with a lot more ease, and I'm not finding myself having to be like this and really trying to reach over to try and use that sled. So for me, I'm going to position it like this way, and that way I can just push that to and from, and it's not going to ruin my back. So just bear in mind that if you need to readjust your holes depending on what orientation you want that router. Once you get holes, you can just drill it out. For this, I'm just using a brad point bit. This was what Google told me was probably one of the better bits for acrylic. You just got to go really slow so you don't fracture that acrylic or burn into it. Just do a quick test fit. Good. Now then just take off the tape. The next thing we're going to do is attach the upper linear bearing guides, and I definitely didn't pronounce that whilst reading it from the manual. They're all made of steel, quite heavy, and I can see there are a bunch of bearings inside of the slot here to help it move along the track. So to attach them, we've got M6 bolts with the M6 washers. The M6 are the biggest bolts that you get in the pack, and the direction they're going to be going are this way. It looks as if Rutlands don't supply their own Allen key with this. Not to worry, because I wouldn't have used it anyway. So it should look something like that. The next thing we're going to assemble are these 2 acrylic side plates. Again, 10mm acrylic, and you've got to take off the plastic film of these as well. I don't know what this stuff is. It's almost like residue. I don't know what it is, but it's not coming off very easy. It's definitely like some kind of like glue residue of some sort. I mean, it's not affecting anything, it's just weird. Then using the T components, get an M6 bolt, the M6 nut and the M6 washer, and you're going to line these holes up with these holes down here. Thread them through the hole, turn it upside down, drop the nut in, and hold the nut in place whilst you tighten up the bolt at the top. And then you're going to repeat the same on this side and also the other acrylic piece as well. Once these are secured, you're going to go back to the M5 washers and the bolts, and then you're going to put them into these 4 holes here because you're going to connect this underneath it. So it should look something like that. And then just repeat that on the other side and also the other piece of acrylic. I've only just noticed this halfway through the video, but these T components here, you want it where the black bolt here is facing on the outside, and that way it's just easier to get your screwdriver in because you've got more space. And you can see on the other side, I've actually done it the wrong way, so I need to take this off, spin it around, and that way I can have the black bolt submerged in here. Splitbark Studio in the future here. This next part is quite important, how you attach it. When you go to attach the rails and the guide bearings, make sure that the rails are on a flat surface and you put them on in this orientation. And I say that because post filming this video, I've actually flipped the sled upside down to take the rails off. When I've gone to put them back on, I've put the rails on upside down. I'll show you some footage here. And I've actually pinged some of the bearings out of the guide bushings themselves. I spoke to Rutlands, they've said they've not had that issue before, and I showed them the film, they probably said it's probably because I put them on upside down, and they've advised not to do that. And to be fair to them, they've actually replaced the guide bushings next day delivery within minutes of me actually making an inquiry about it. So follow the footage after this clip and make sure you follow it and you don't do it upside down in future like I did. So now you should have 2 of these. Get one of the rails out, and all you're going to do is attach it to the rail. and it should glide along like this. So now we need to add the stop blocks on either end of both rails. Now when you get your kit, it's important to check to see that these stop blocks actually fit your rail. And long story short, Rutland's last batch, they've been sending out the wrong size stop blocks. In fact, these are too small to fit on these rails. After receiving this kit, I hadn't even opened it to check at this point, but Rutland sent out 4 more stop blocks which do correctly fit the rails. And also a little sorry note to say, my bad, we've sent you the wrong size ones originally. So if you've just bought this and you can't get the original stop blocks onto the rail, it's probably because they're the wrong size and you need to get a hold of Rutland's to replace them for you. Attaching the stop blocks is just as easy as putting it on and then tightening the grub screw. Yeah, that holds it pretty good. I can't seem to move it at all, so they do work. So now it should just be a case of getting the rails, insert them through the T-bits, then the router plate, and then the other T-bit on the other side. I sprayed a tiny bit of WD-40 just on the end of the rails just to help guide it through, but let's give it a go. Right, I finally got it through a little bit to the end here, so I'm going to put the Allen bolts back in. That will tighten the T component up, and that should hold this rail in place, hopefully. Right, I just want to extend it a bit further now. Now I'm hoping I can just pull the rails apart. Right, there we go. My first impressions of it is it glides really well. I'm not getting any kind of friction or anything like that. Going across seems fine. Bearings run smooth. Going across here, again, it seems to run pretty smooth. I haven't gone to maximum capacity. I'll do that later on in the video. For now, I just want to make sure that it all works properly. So now it's all assembled, I can finally start talking about some of the dimensions. The width between the rails, it can be adjusted. As you can probably see here, I've got a little bit of excess here, purely because my workbench isn't wide enough to take the whole capacity. The maximum capacity between the rails can go all the way up into 1 meter in width. However, you need to bear in mind that that does not mean that you can fit a slab in this up to 1 meter in width. Because there's a buffer between the router plate and the sides, you've got to take away a little bit of space to account for that. So the official amount of routable workspace is around 80 centimeters in width. So if you're going to be running a slab through this, you need to take that in consideration, that 80 centimeters is pretty much the max you can cut in width. The length of the rails is approximately 1.2 meters long. However, you're not limited to a slab that is 1.2 meters long, because there's nothing stopping you from getting to the limit, and then you can either bring all the rails over the slab even more and then continue to run it, or you can actually just drag the slab through a bit further and then continue it that way. So theoretically, the length of slab that you can mill is infinite. The distance from the top of the base plate here, where your router is going to sit on, to the bottom of the workpiece is approximately 66 millimeters thick. The maximum thickness of slab that you can mill, as is right now, is around 48 millimeters thick. Now for me, I've got pieces of wood that are almost 60 millimeters thick. However, Rutland suggests that if you've got anything thicker than that, then there's nothing stopping you from putting a few pieces of wood underneath the rails and raising the whole sled up that way. And that way, again, theoretically, you can cut a slab even twice the thickness of the recommended capacity. If you decide to raise it up with a piece of wood, then just take use of the screw holes that go all the way up the rails, screw that down, and that way you won't get any of this happening as you're using the sled. And also just use a piece of wood that's actually the length of the rails, unlike what I've done here. This is just what I had left over in the garage. Well, I suppose the only thing I've got to do now is attach the actual router. I do want to see if it flexes as I drop it. Yeah, there is a bit of flexion there. Although it looks like some of the flexion has actually come from the sled itself. Let me show you. It's a little bit difficult to see, but there is a very small amount of deflection. I don't know if you can see that very well. There's a slight bow to it, not terrible. If I put the router in, I don't think the bow is actually any worse with the router being in it, to be quite honest. But you can see there is a little bit of a bow. Hopefully that doesn't impact anything. So this is the first pass I've done, and I mean, credit to the router and the bit, this is a beautiful finish. It's only a little bit of a mark there, but it almost doesn't need sanding. But then I don't suppose that's necessarily the sled's issue, but... I then tested it with a large slab of English yew. Now this slab was around 1.2 meters long by 0.7 in width, so it could just about fit. It's also 60 millimeters thick, so I've had to raise it up with some wood, as you can see here. And I didn't really want to take a huge amount off. I just wanted to skim the surface just to remove that warp, like you can see there. And I just really wanted it just to sit flat within the resin mold. The sled itself performed really well. It performed exactly as it should. The bearings and rails moved really smooth. In fact, it glided so well along the wood that the router almost wanted to pull itself away from me, just because the moment it tasted that wood, it just wanted to keep cutting through it, and I had to really try and hold it back so it didn't actually go off on a tangent. There's not really a huge amount more I can talk about this slab. It's left a decent finish, it left it flat, and most of all, it took the warp out of the slab, which is what I wanted it for. It was really easy to set up. I did have to put the bit through the bottom of the acrylic plate rather than drop it through, because the bit was about 2.5 inches wide, which is bigger than the circumference of that hole in the acrylic base. But as I was using it, you know, I've got nothing to report. It did exactly as it should and nothing more. The bearings ran really smooth. I had no issues with sawdust getting inside the bearings or creating friction and clogging it up that way. You're going to want to keep the rails maintained, you know, wax them up every now and then so you don't get that issue in the future. If I had to be a little bit nitpicky, and this is kind of a half reflection on me and half a reflection on the sled, it's that how awkward it is to get the router into the acrylic base. Now for my specific router, I can't see where them holes are for the base plate from above. I have to go underneath the router and attach it that way, which meant when I went to attach it onto this acrylic plate here, I've had to put the rails across 2 different tables and try and crawl under it and attach it that way. I make a point of this because there are router sleds out there that to get the acrylic plate off to attach to your router, it's as simple as grabbing it and just pulling it off. There are no bolts or rails or anything like that you need to worry about. It's as simple as taking it off, attaching the router and dropping it back in, and then off you go. It's really that simple. With this, it's almost like a permanent feature to it, so to get a router off and on is a little bit tricky. You could probably get away with maybe flipping it upside down and attaching it to the router that way, but even then I think it's still going to be a bit of a faff, and to me I found it easier just putting it across 2 tables and crawling underneath it like I was a mechanic working on a car. The acrylic plate worked well in the end. I know there's that very slight bow, but I don't actually think that made any difference. If you were really that worried about the acrylic from bowing, then I suppose if you've got the ability to, there's nothing stopping you from buying a piece of steel, drilling all the holes out yourself, and then swapping it out for the acrylic. So let's talk about the price. On their website, with delivery, it only costs £157, which, if you don't know much about router sleds, is very cheap. In fact, it's probably one of the cheapest on the market. If you were to Google other router sleds, you're going to come across ones that are potentially smaller. They're going to be made of, you know, like an aluminium frame, so You know, they might not be as strong as steel, and they're going to still be, you know, twice the amount of money. So for £157, this is an absolute bargain. And I also think it's worth noting again, I've bought this with my own money, it's not sponsored, and that's generally how I feel about this thing. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check this sled out. I'll also leave a link in the description for the bit I used and also the router that I used, just in case you were curious. I'm going to recommend it for a DIYer. I think it's amazing. Do I think it's the best router sled out there? Probably not, no. Again, this is meant for people on a budget, DIY friendly. If you like this video, then please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. I try and mix up the videos I post. I kind of want to do like tool reviews, you know, how to assemble them, all the way up into the projects that I build, sort of spice it up a little bit so it's not always the same. But until next time, I will see you guys later. Cheers.